Hey there. I know why you're here. You're looking for a story that will help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Something calming, a little mysterious. Something that carries your mind away. Well, you've come to the right place. Before we begin tonight's journey, do me a little favor. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Even just a good night. It really helps more sleepy souls like you find their way here. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's story. It started with a knock, quiet, measured, the kind of sound that shouldn't mean anything. But it did. It came once, then again, always at the same time, 3:12 a.m. And each time, it was followed by something worse, something I couldn't explain, something I couldn't stop. I thought I was imagining it, until the first VHS tape appeared. No note, no markings, just the cold weight of it sitting on my doorstep like a warning. I didn't own a camera. I didn't remember being filmed, but when I played the tape, there I was, sleeping, peacefully, unaware. And the timestamp? It was from the night before. What followed wasn't just terrifying, it was impossible. More tapes arrived, and with each one, I saw myself doing things I didn't remember, standing where I shouldn't be, staring at things that weren't there, and then smiling in a way that didn't feel like me. I changed the locks, I moved homes, I stopped talking to people, but no matter where I went, the knocking continued, the tapes continued, and every time I pressed play, I lost a little more of myself. This is not just a story about fear, it's about the creeping realization that you are no longer in control of your own life, that something else is watching, learning, waiting. And if you've ever heard a knock in the middle of the night and brushed it off, you might want to stay with me, because the next tape might have you in it. The knock came at exactly 3:12 a.m., just as the silence had begun to settle into her bones. 3 sharp, deliberate taps, not the kind made by wind-blown branches or settling walls, but the kind that sounded intentional, human, measured. She woke from the sound like being pulled out from underwater. Her breath caught somewhere between sleep and alarm. The room was dark, but her eyes had grown accustomed to it. She lay still, eyes wide open, every nerve in her body tightening. At first, she told herself it was nothing, just a dream, a trick of her restless mind. But then she sat up, slowly, the sheets whispering around her. The clock on her phone glowed in the dark. 3:12 a.m. The time etched itself into her memory like a brand. She didn't move for nearly 10 minutes. She just sat there in the dark, listening. The knock hadn't come again, but the echo of it pulsed in her chest. It was the kind of sound you couldn't unhear, the kind that worms its way into your mind and stays there, even when everything else goes quiet. Eventually, with cautious steps and breath held tight, she got up and tiptoed to the front door. Her bare feet moved softly over the hardwood floor, each creak of the boards beneath her sounding too loud. When she opened the door, the world outside was still. The porch light cast a pale yellow haze over the front steps. The street beyond looked untouched, silent, empty. No signs of anyone, no cars, no rustling bushes, nothing at all. She stood there a moment longer, unsure if she was comforted or unsettled by the nothingness. Then, just as carefully, she closed the door and locked it. She checked the windows, every single one, all latched, all secure. Her mind raced through possibilities. A prank, but there were no kids on her street. A neighbor, then why no one there? Maybe the wind, but no, she knew the difference. This wasn't that. She pressed her back against the door and looked into the dark hallway behind her, half expecting to see movement. But there was nothing, just shadows stretching along the walls. Eventually, she went back to bed, though the quiet no longer felt like comfort. It felt like anticipation, like a breath being held. She didn't sleep again that night. She just waited for the sun to rise. The next morning, the memory of the knock lingered like smoke after a fire. It clung to everything, her thoughts, her movements, even her morning coffee. It wasn't fear yet, but it was close. A tension that never quite relaxed. She told herself it wasn't worth overthinking. She'd been under a lot of pressure lately. Work stress, late nights, barely any rest. Maybe she imagined it. That was possible, wasn't it? She scrolled through her phone, trying to distract herself with news, memes, messages, anything that didn't involve doors and knocking. But all the while, she kept glancing toward the front of the house, toward that door, as if expecting it to happen again, as if the knock had been a question she hadn't answered, and now the silence was waiting for her reply. That night, she tried to dismiss it. She stayed up later than usual, lost in streaming shows and doom scrolling through headlines she wouldn't remember in the morning. But despite her best efforts, her eyes kept drifting to the clock. Midnight passed. Then one, still nothing. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Maybe that was it. Maybe it had just been a one-time thing. She turned off the lights and curled under the blanket, letting the darkness wrap around her like it always did. Sleep came slower this time, but it came eventually. The house was quiet, the air was still, but when she started to drift into unconsciousness, she heard it again. 3 knocks, exactly the same, exactly at 3:12 a.m. This time the sound didn't come from the front door, it came from inside the house. She froze, her body locked into place beneath the covers, and her eyes snapped open. Her breath stilled, her pulse pounded in her ears. The knock had come from the hallway just outside her bedroom. She knew this house, knew the acoustics, the way sound traveled. This wasn't outside, this wasn't wind, this wasn't a dream. She didn't move, didn't dare. The air had gone heavy. Her chest felt tight, like the very air around her was holding its breath too. Minutes passed, long, dragging minutes. No more knocks came, but the silence wasn't empty. It was dense, watchful. Her mind conjured images she didn't want, of someone standing just beyond the doorway, of eyes peering in through shadows, of a presence she couldn't see but could feel. She stayed frozen until the first light of dawn crept in through the blinds. Morning came with no answers, just exhaustion and a deep, unsettling chill that never seemed to leave her skin. She spent the day trying to shake it off. She didn't tell anyone. What could she even say? That she was hearing knocks that came from nowhere, that they always happened at the same exact time, that the second time they came from inside her home. She cleaned the house, top to bottom, checked every lock, every window, every closet. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs of intrusion, no camera, no explanation. But that didn't ease her mind. If anything, it made it worse. Because now she wasn't afraid of something breaking in. She was afraid of something already being there. Something that didn't need to break in at all. She didn't sleep that night. She stayed on the couch, TV playing at low volume, lights on in every room. 3:12 a.m. came and went. No knocks, just silence. But she didn't trust it. Something had changed. Something was building. And then the following morning, when she opened her front door to let in the air, she saw it. sitting on the welcome mat, an old VHS tape, unmarked, plain, dusty. It hadn't been there the night before. She was sure of it. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She stared at the tape, unsure whether to pick it up or leave it there and pretend none of this was happening. But pretending wasn't going to save her. Pretending hadn't stopped the knocks, so she picked it up. It was warm. She stared at the VHS tape in her hands for far too long, like it might suddenly whisper to her or melt away if she blinked. There was something strange about how warm it felt. Not sun-warmed, not like something left out too long on a summer's day. This warmth felt unnatural, as if it had been handled recently, as if someone had just placed it there minutes before she opened the door. She looked around instinctively, scanning the sidewalk, the front yard, the bushes. The air was still eerily calm, the neighborhood drowsy in the morning light. There were no joggers, no passing cars, not even a bird perched nearby. Just that silence again. Not peaceful, not this time. This time, it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do. She didn't own a working VCR anymore. She hadn't for years, but there was one stored in the garage, buried beneath boxes of forgotten electronics and old college memories. It belonged to her parents, who had once insisted on keeping every piece of technology they ever owned, long after the rest of the world moved on. She never thought she'd need it again, certainly not for something like this. Dust clung to her fingers as she pulled the VCR free and set it up in the living room. The ancient machine gave a low mechanical groan as it powered on, the display screen flickering to life with a faint green glow. Her hands trembled as she slid the tape into the slot. There was a soft click, followed by static. The screen pulsed. Her mouth went dry. Then the footage began. It was her bedroom, same angle as her doorframe, same bedspread, same slant of light from the lamp she left on overnight. The timestamp in the corner read 3:12 a.m. The same time, her breath caught. She stared at the screen, unable to look away. There she was, lying still under the blanket, turned to the side, hair strewn across the pillow. She looked peaceful, unaware, unprotected. The camera didn't move. It didn't pan, didn't zoom. It just watched. The footage played for several minutes, showing her shifting once in her sleep, murmuring softly. Her hand twitched. Then she stilled again. Nothing else happened. No figure entered the frame. No noise, no sudden scare. It was just her, sleeping, being watched. The tape ended in silence. She felt like vomiting. Her hands shook so badly, she had to brace herself against the arm of the couch. She stared at the blank screen, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. But there was no explanation. There couldn't be. She didn't have a camera in her room. She lived alone. She never filmed herself. And yet, someone had. Someone had been in her bedroom. Someone had stood there long enough to capture minutes of footage. Someone had done it last night. She hadn't heard a thing, hadn't felt anything. The idea that she could have been so unaware, that someone could have been watching her while she was completely exposed and helpless, was more than horrifying. It was a violation so deep, it felt like her skin wasn't hers anymore. She checked her entire house again. Every room, every drawer, every vent. She didn't stop until she'd torn through every corner, every forgotten closet, every inch of crawl space. There was no camera. Nothing was wired, nothing hidden. There were no signs of forced entry, no misplaced objects, nothing stolen. Everything was as it had always been, except for the feeling, that unbearable, crawling sensation, just beneath the surface. She started questioning her own sanity. Was it possible to hallucinate something so vivid? Could her mind be playing tricks on her, fabricating something that never happened? But the tape was still in the machine. The footage was still there. And when she played it again, it was identical. Her body, her breath, that time, that silence, her unmistakable reality captured without her consent. She considered going to the police, but what would she tell them? That someone left a tape on her doorstep with footage of her sleeping, even though there were no signs of a break-in, that she didn't own any cameras, yet somehow a recording existed. She pictured the raised eyebrows, the quiet judgments, the doubt in their voices. She had no suspect, no evidence, no threat explicitly made, and no crime they could charge. At least, not yet. Besides, some part of her was afraid that telling anyone would make it worse. As if speaking it aloud would give it more power. As if the thing behind the camera was waiting for her to acknowledge it. So she didn't tell anyone. She went to work like normal, smiled at her neighbor, picked up groceries, but everything felt hollow. She kept checking over her shoulder, waiting for something, anything to change. That night, she left every light in the house on. She didn't sleep in her bed. She stayed on the couch, fully clothed, with the TV playing old sitcoms to fill the silence. But even with the noise, her ears were straining for that sound, that knock. Every hour she looked at the clock. Midnight, 1, 2. Her heart pounded so loudly, she thought she might faint. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., it came again. 3 slow knocks. But this time, they weren't on the door. They weren't from the hallway. They were coming from the ceiling, right above her. 3 firm taps, like someone knocking from the attic above. She didn't move. She just sat there, frozen, the color draining from her face. She didn't have an attic. She didn't move for a long time. The knock had come and gone, but the sound lived on, repeating in her memory like a metronome counting down to something unseen. Her gaze stayed locked on the ceiling above, eyes unblinking, every nerve tuned to the silence that followed. It wasn't just the impossibility of the sound that disturbed her. It was the specificity. The same 3 knocks, the same precise timing. It didn't matter that she didn't have an attic. Something, or someone, was above her. Logic warred with fear in her mind. But fear had a head start, and logic was quickly losing. She stood only when her legs stopped trembling, grabbed the flashlight from the drawer near the kitchen, and tried to remind herself she wasn't being watched. But she didn't believe her own thoughts. Not anymore. There was a crawl space in the ceiling above the hallway, the kind of square panel you'd need a ladder to reach. She had never opened it. It had always been there, just an architectural leftover from a home built decades ago. But now that forgotten panel had taken on a new presence. It loomed above her, demanding attention, daring her to look inside. She set the ladder beneath it, her hands damp on each rung as she climbed. The flashlight beam jittered with every small tremor in her grip. When she pushed the panel upward, it gave easily, as if someone had recently unlatched it from the inside. Cold air breathed down on her face, dry and still. She lifted her head into the crawl space, heart pounding hard enough to feel in her teeth. But there was nothing there, just dust, insulation, and something in the far corner, something square. She crawled further in, her knees creaking across the boards. The beam of the flashlight landed on the object. Another VHS tape. No markings, no dust on this one, as if it had been placed there recently, deliberately. She hesitated, only a moment before reaching for it. As soon as her fingers touched the plastic, she felt that same warmth as before. That disturbing, unnatural warmth. She backed out of the crawl space, not bothering to replace the panel. Every part of her screamed to throw the tape away, to burn it, to forget it ever existed. But dread has a cruel way of masquerading as curiosity, and she already knew she was going to watch it. She had to. Ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. This wasn't the kind of fear you could outrun. She didn't wait for sunrise this time. She went straight to the VCR, every light in the house blazing behind her, every lock checked twice. She inserted the second tape, hands clenched too tightly around the remote. The screen flickered again, static for a few seconds. Same angle, same timestamp, 3:12 a.m. But this footage was different. In the previous tape, she had been asleep, motionless, innocent. But in this one, she wasn't. She was sitting up in bed, awake, but not quite right. Her posture was stiff, her arms at her sides, eyes wide open. The version of her on the tape didn't move like someone awake. She didn't blink, didn't shift. She just stared straight ahead, directly into the camera, as if she knew it was there, as if she wanted it to see her. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hands started trembling again, the remote almost slipping from her fingers. The camera never moved, but the longer she stared at the footage, the more wrong it felt. There was something off about the way her face looked, like her muscles were too tense, her jaw too locked, her expression not entirely human. Then, without warning, her image on the screen began to smile, slow, awkward, as if it were being forced, like something stretching the skin into shape, without understanding how to make it genuine. The smile grew wider, unnatural, and then just before the screen cut to black, a faint whispering sound bled through the speakers, garbled, like a loop of reversed audio played just beneath the static. She replayed it 3 times, but the words never became clear. Still, the feeling stayed. She wasn't supposed to see this. The tape wasn't meant for her. She didn't sleep at all that night. Even when the sun rose and spilled warm light through her windows, the warmth didn't reach her. It didn't matter that it was morning. The world no longer felt safe at any hour. She unplugged the VCR, took the tapes, and shoved them into a box in the back of her closet. But it was like trying to put a wildfire in a drawer. The damage had already started. Every time she blinked, she saw that version of herself staring, unblinking, grinning. That wasn't her. It couldn't be. But it looked like her, moved like her, knew where the camera was, knew when to look. She thought about calling someone, a friend, a family member, anyone, but she couldn't explain what she had seen without sounding insane. And what if she wasn't insane? What if she was right? What if telling someone only made it worse? The next day passed like a dream she couldn't wake from. Her limbs felt disconnected, her thoughts slippery and circular. She tried to focus on normal tasks, washing dishes, answering emails, sorting laundry, but her eyes kept drifting toward the closet, toward the box, toward the thing she was trying to pretend wasn't real. Then, just after dinner, as she walked past the front door on her way to the kitchen, she stopped cold. There was a sound, something sliding against the wood. She leaned in, ear close to the door. Silence, then a soft thump. Her chest tightened. She hesitated, then slowly unlocked and opened the door. The porch was empty, but at her feet, resting neatly on the mat, was another tape. She didn't touch the tape right away. She just stared at it. This silent, anonymous object resting on her doormat. like it belonged there. It looked identical to the others. Black, unmarked, no writing, no label, but she already knew it would be different. Worse, her fingers hesitated above it, like she was hovering over something toxic. She couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting someone to be watching from the sidewalk, or the shadows of a tree, or even her own window, but there was nothing, just quiet. Just the wind moving through a distant branch. She bent down slowly and picked it up. It was warm again, always warm. That same sickening, skin-like heat. This time the temperature didn't just feel wrong. It felt familiar, like something breathing. She carried it inside, every step stiff, robotic, as though some part of her had finally given up arguing with fear. She didn't even pretend to wait this time. No pacing, no excuses, no delay. The moment she stepped inside, she locked the door behind her and made her way to the old VCR, hands trembling with every second that passed. The second tape had already altered something in her, split her perception of herself into two competing truths. The person she remembered being, and the one who had sat up in bed, smiling that unnatural smile. As she slid the third tape into the slot, she realized something even more disturbing. She wasn't just afraid of what she might see. She was afraid she might remember doing it, that the girl on the screen might not be a stranger, but a buried version of herself waking up piece by piece. The screen flickered, the static hissed, and then, without warning, it began. The camera was no longer stationary. It moved, shaky and handheld. It drifted down a hallway she recognized immediately, her own. The low lighting, the tilt of a picture on the wall, the worn carpet just before her bedroom. It was all there, but it wasn't a security camera, wasn't set on a shelf. It was being carried by someone. The camera paused outside her door. She felt her breath hitch as she watched the doorknob turn ever so slightly, then click open. The camera crept forward, inch by inch, the door creaking open to reveal her bedroom. The air inside the room on the tape looked heavy. Still, she was sleeping again. This time curled on her side, one arm stretched toward the edge of the bed, peaceful, exposed. And then the camera approached, closer and closer, until it stopped just feet from her. Her hair moved slightly with her breath. She didn't stir. She watched, transfixed, as the lens remained focused on her sleeping form for what felt like hours. And just when she thought the footage might end, the camera slowly tilted to the left, toward the mirror on her dresser. The reflection stared back, not of her, but of the person holding the camera, for only a moment, just long enough to show the outline of someone tall, not entirely clear, blurred, like a bad transmission, but undeniably human. Then the camera moved back, retreating slowly, quietly, until it exited the room, turned the corner, and the screen went black. She sat frozen on the couch, heart hammering, unable to move, unable to cry. The reflection was what broke her. She rewound the tape, over and over, trying to make out details, but the face never resolved. Only its presence remained. A watcher, a recorder, a visitor she had never known was there. That night, every shadow in the house felt like a trap. The hallway stretched longer, the corners darkened. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed suspicious, like static hiding speech. She unplugged the VCR and wrapped the tapes in an old towel, stuffing them into the bottom drawer of a desk she hadn't opened in years. But it didn't matter. The footage was seared into her memory. Not just the visuals, but the feeling, the wrongness of being documented, studied. She felt altered, like someone had filmed more than her body, like they had captured her soul on tape, fractured it, and played it back until it no longer fit in her chest the same way. She tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a prank, maybe someone had broken in, but that would require a who, a why, and the thing in the mirror had no face, no answers, only presence. Sleep became impossible. The hours between midnight and 4 a.m. stretched unbearably long. She stayed awake with every light on, eyeing the door, the ceiling, the closet. She hadn't dreamed in days, but she began hallucinating in the corners of her vision. Movement that wasn't there, breaths she didn't take. She covered the mirror in her bedroom with a towel, then the one in the hallway, then the one in the bathroom. But even covered they felt alive, like they were humming just beyond the cloth, waiting to show her something again. She was unraveling, and she knew it. But what terrified her most wasn't the possibility that she was going crazy. It was the fear that she wasn't, that everything she saw was real, that someone or something had come into her home, into her room, and watched her repeatedly, and left no trace but the tapes and the knocks. Then one evening, as she sat in the living room, sleepless, hollow, afraid to even blink, she heard a different sound. Not a knock, not exactly. It was softer, a click, a plastic thud. She turned toward the hallway, and her blood ran cold. The closet drawer, the one where she had hidden the tapes, was open, just a crack. She stared at it, unmoving, her heart pounding in her throat. She had locked it. She knew she had. Slowly she crossed the room, each step like walking into a nightmare. She knelt before the drawer and pulled it open. The tapes were still there, but on top of them now sat something else. A photograph. Old, faded, grainy. It showed a room, her bed, her sleeping body, and standing in the doorway was her, or something wearing her face. She didn't remember standing there. Not in the doorway, not in that shirt, not with that expression, but there she was, captured, in grainy detail, looking directly at her sleeping self, as though she were the intruder, as though she had been the one filming. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she sat hard on the floor, still clutching the photograph in her trembling hand. The face in the image was unmistakably hers. Same hair, same frame, same slouch in the shoulders. But the expression was blank. Hollow. Her eyes, if they were her eyes, held no trace of emotion, just a flat, watching stillness. Her lips were parted slightly, not in surprise, not in fear, but in something else. Expectation, recognition, like she was waiting for herself to wake up and see her. And that was what unsettled her the most, that whatever had been standing there wanted to be seen. She stayed on the floor for hours, unable to do anything but stare at the photograph. The edges were curled, the colors slightly washed out, but everything about the room in the image matched the current state of her own. The open closet door, the bedsheet folded over once at the foot, even the light from the hallway spilling in across the floor in the same pattern. The photo hadn't been taken from memory. It had been taken recently, probably the same night as the last tape. And if the figure in the doorway wasn't really her, then it meant someone, or something, could mimic her, perfectly, down to the smallest detail, the way her hair frayed in sleep, the slump in her shoulders, the twist in her lips when she dreamt. It wasn't just imitation, it was possession, visual, maybe even spiritual. Something that didn't just want to watch her, it wanted to be her. She checked her phone, desperate for a voice that wasn't her own. Her fingers hovered over names she hadn't dialed in years, friends she hadn't spoken to since college, relatives who wouldn't understand. She could imagine how the conversation would go. "Hey, long time no talk. Listen, do you remember how I look when I sleep? Because something wearing my face left me a VHS tape." No one would believe her, not without the tapes, and she couldn't show them. She wouldn't, because once someone else saw them, it would no longer be her nightmare alone. It would become shared. And there was something sacred about keeping it isolated, as if letting someone else witness it might give the thing behind it a new door to walk through. So she stayed silent, alone, swallowed by a growing awareness that something had already stepped into her life and was learning how to walk around in her skin. She slept with the lights on again that night, but she didn't rest. Her eyes stayed half open, even when her body shut down. Every time she drifted off, she dreamed in snapshots. The photograph, the hallway, her own face staring back at her through shadows. In one dream, she stood in the doorway again, holding a camera with one hand and pointing at herself with the other, like a teacher waiting for a student to answer a question. In another, she was lying in bed, watching herself sleep from the ceiling, unable to move, unable to scream. She awoke every hour with a gasp, drenched in sweat, the bedsheets tangled around her legs like restraints. By morning, she hadn't gotten more than 20 minutes of continuous sleep. But something else had changed. The photograph was gone. She searched everywhere, under the drawer, in the drawer, behind the tapes, under the couch. She tore through every surface she could remember touching the day before, growing more frantic with each place she found empty. Nothing. It had vanished, like it had never been there. Her mind tried to explain it. Maybe she had moved it without thinking. Maybe she had thrown it away, in a haze. Maybe she had dreamed the whole thing. But there was an indentation in the bottom of the drawer, in the dust where the photograph had been. That mark hadn't been there before. It was real, and now it was gone, taken or retrieved. Whatever was leaving these breadcrumbs seemed to be playing a game, one that didn't follow normal rules, one that rewrote its own pages while she was still reading. For the rest of the day, she didn't sit still. She couldn't. She kept the television on, the blinds closed, the phone in the abyss. He made coffee and didn't drink it. Boiled water for no reason. Reorganized books she hadn't read in years. Her hands needed to move, or she'd feel like the walls were watching. She started checking the time compulsively, every 15 minutes. 12:22, 12:37, 1:04, 1:18. She told herself she wasn't watching for 3:12, but she was. She always was. Her body already knew when the hour would arrive, even if her mind pretended not to care. When the afternoon light turned gold and shadows stretched long, she felt the dread sink deeper, like the floor had tilted just slightly, and everything familiar was sliding toward some dark center. And by the time the clock struck 3 a.m., her heart was already racing. She sat in the middle of the living room, cross-legged on the floor, watching the front door. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe too deeply. 3:11 came. She counted the seconds in her head, and at 3:12 a.m., she heard it. 3 knocks. Not on the door, not on the ceiling. This time, it came from the hallway mirror, the one she had covered with a towel 3 days ago. 3 firm, hollow taps, as if something behind the glass wanted to come through. She stood slowly, her entire body buzzing with adrenaline and disbelief. She walked toward the mirror, one shaky step at a time. When she reached the hallway, She saw the towel had fallen or been pulled. The mirror was bare, and in it, just for a moment, she saw herself, standing completely still. But her reflection was smiling. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stood there, paralyzed, staring into the mirror where her reflection smiled back at her. Only it wasn't smiling anymore. It had stopped the moment she blinked. But she knew what she'd seen. It was like catching a stranger in your house through a window. And when you look again, they're gone. But the terror stays. Her hands had gone cold. Her jaw was clenched so tight, it ached. For a moment, she considered smashing the mirror, grabbing the nearest object, and reducing it to glittering shards, just to prove it didn't control her. But something deep in her gut stopped her. An ancient kind of fear, not for herself, but for what might come through if the glass was broken. If it really was a door, what if shattering it was just an invitation? She backed away slowly, keeping her eyes locked on the glass, as though turning her back might allow whatever was in there to step out. Every sound in the house became amplified, floorboards settling, the refrigerator hum, the faint rustle of leaves outside. Each one stabbed through her like a needle. She retreated to the kitchen, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter like it might keep her anchored in the real world. She opened a cabinet and grabbed the roll of duct tape, walked back to the mirror with deliberate steps, and covered every edge of the glass until not a sliver remained exposed. Her reflection disappeared behind grey adhesive lines, but it didn't make her feel better. It felt like putting tape over a mouth to stop it from whispering. She still felt watched. Not just watched, copied. She barely slept. Not even in bursts. Her eyes refused to close, even when her body began to shut down. Her mind paced, clattering through every memory of the last week, looking for something she missed, something she overlooked. It wasn't just the tapes. It wasn't just the mirror. Something had been coming long before the knocking started. She remembered moments, small ones, insignificant on their own, that now felt drenched in new meaning. The feeling of being stared at in her own shower, waking up with the light on when she was sure she'd turned it off. A phone call that rang once and hung up. The dreams, always the dreams. She'd been losing time, maybe even losing herself, long before the first knock. The thought made her dizzy. What if the version of her in the doorway wasn't new? When the morning came, she moved like a ghost through her own house. She avoided her reflection in everything. Glass, windows, even the screen of her phone. She felt split, like two people loosely stitched together. She knew she needed to do something, to act, but everything logical had slipped from her grasp. The police? What would she show them now? The photograph was gone. The tapes were real, but if she handed them over, what if they vanished too? Worse, what if someone else watched them and it spread? What if this wasn't a haunting but a transmission? Something viral, contagious. She paced for hours, rehearsing conversations she'd never have, dialing and erasing numbers she couldn't bring herself to call. And then the phone rang. Not hers, the landline. She hadn't heard it ring in years. It sat under a pile of unopened mail in the hallway corner, plugged in but never touched. Her heart seized. The sound was shrill, jarring, out of place in a house that had forgotten how to feel normal. She walked toward it slowly, knees weak, the air thick around her. The caller ID was blank, just dashes where numbers should be. The phone rang, a fifth time, a sixth, on the seventh. She picked it up, her voice caught in her throat. She didn't say hello, she just listened. There was no voice on the other end. No breath, just the faint sound of tape turning in a VCR. That soft, low whirring, then a click, silence. The line went dead. She stood there holding the receiver long after it ended, arm trembling, mind reeling. That night, she set up a camera of her own. She didn't care if it caught nothing. She needed something to do, something to make her feel less helpless. She positioned her phone on a small tripod across the room, pointing directly at her bed. She made sure it was recording, double-checked the red light, triple-checked the battery. She told herself she wouldn't fall asleep, but somewhere between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., she did. Not by choice, not like before. It felt pulled, like her body was no longer following her orders, like someone had flipped a switch in her spine and told her to shut down. She awoke with the sun, jolted upright with a gasp. She reached for her phone with frantic hands and opened the video file immediately, skipping through frame by frame. The footage began just like before, her sleeping, twitching slightly, peaceful. And then, at 3:12 a.m., she sat up. Not now. Not the real her. The her on the screen. Just like the tape. Stiff. Robotic. Unblinking. She watched herself rise in bed. Eyes still closed but posture suddenly rigid. Her head tilted slowly to one side. She reached out with one hand, not toward the camera, but toward the edge of the bed. And then, she smiled. Not at the camera, at something else, something just off frame. Her lips moved as if speaking, but there was no sound. Her eyes remained closed, and then, after nearly 2 minutes of motionless sitting, her body laid back down, as if nothing happened. She didn't twitch again, didn't stir. The recording ended. The real her dropped the phone. Her knees buckled. Her stomach turned. She didn't remember doing any of it. But the video didn't lie. She was no longer just being watched. She was performing. She didn't remember lying back down. She didn't remember smiling. She didn't remember speaking. But the footage was clear, undeniable. The timestamp read 3:12 a.m. Just like the tapes. Just like the knocks. The rhythm of it all was suffocating. It was always 3:12. Always 3 knocks. Always her. But not her. She stared at the screen until her vision blurred, but no amount of blinking would make the truth disappear. It was worse now. Deeper. Not just someone watching from the outside, but something slipping into her skin, using her body like a doorway, like a disguise. Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone again, not to call anyone, but to delete the footage. She didn't want proof anymore. She didn't want to see herself like that again. It was like watching her own possession in slow motion. But even after the file was gone, the dread remained. It followed her from room to room like static clinging to her skin. She kept glancing into corners, half expecting her own face to be staring back at her from the shadows. Her reflection was taped over. Her laptop screen stayed shut. She covered the TV in a blanket, but it didn't stop the feeling. The intrusion was no longer visual. It was internal, like a second consciousness pacing behind her thoughts. She found herself doing things without meaning to, reaching for the door when she hadn't planned to, standing completely still for minutes with no memory of why, staring at the microwave's digital clock, as if waiting for something. There were stretches of time she couldn't account for, minutes she'd lost, and each time the clock read a little closer to 3:12. She began to wonder if the figure in the doorway, the one that wore her face, wasn't just pretending to be her. What if it was her? Not a copy, not a doppelganger, but the version of herself that lived in the gaps, in the missing hours. The sleepwalking, the mirror smiles. The knocks. What if those weren't outside intrusions, but glimpses into something she was becoming? The thought felt like a wire pulled too tight across her mind. She tried to resist it, to tell herself it was paranoia, stress, trauma, but a memory surfaced then, quiet, small. A childhood dream. She'd been no more than 8. In the dream she stood in her bedroom at night, looking at herself sleeping. And when the sleeping version woke, the standing one whispered, "You don't get to be the only one." She hadn't remembered that dream in years, and now she couldn't stop hearing that voice. The next day she didn't eat, couldn't. Food had no place in this kind of fear. Her world had shrunk to one thing, 3:12 a.m. Everything before it was countdown. Everything after it was aftermath. She tried to stay awake again that night, downing coffee until her stomach ached, pacing the hallway, splashing her face with cold water every 10 minutes. She set alarms for 3:10, 3:11, 3:13, but nothing stopped it. At 3:12, all 3 alarms went silent at once. Not snoozed, not dismissed, just gone. She looked at the screen in disbelief. And in that moment of stillness, 3 knocks from the bathroom mirror. Even though it was covered, she stumbled backward, clutching the wall, the air thick with electricity. Her phone was still in her hand, its screen frozen. The timer stuck on 3 hours 12 minutes and 0 seconds. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The knocks repeated, not louder, just closer. And then her phone screen changed. Without her touching it, a video began to play. One she hadn't recorded. No title, no file name, just the image. A hallway. Her hallway. The view moved toward the bedroom, slowly, like a camera floating inches above the ground. But there were no footsteps, no breathing, only the hum of static growing louder. The camera entered the room. She was there again, sleeping, of course. But this time, something else was already standing in the corner, facing her, still, tall. It looked like her. Same outline, same posture, but its head was tilted too far, almost unnaturally. The thing didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Then the video cut to black. She dropped the phone, her body screamed to run, but she couldn't, not yet. Not until she knew. Was it recording the past or the future? That was the moment she realized something crucial. The knocks didn't come after the tapes. They came before. They were warnings, like a countdown to the next recording, the next performance. She was no longer living a linear life. She was circling it, trapped in a loop of moments replaying themselves over and over through new eyes, hers, or something using hers. She had no more illusions left. She didn't need anyone to believe her. She didn't care if she sounded insane. What mattered now was stopping the next tape from being made. She tore down the mirror coverings, ripped the duct tape off with frantic hands, smashed the one in the hallway with a hammer. Glass rained down, sparkling like snow. She kept swinging until her hands bled. She didn't care. If they were doors, she was sealing them shut with shards. But that night, even without the mirrors, even with the lights on, she felt the shift. The house was quieter than ever, too quiet, like it was waiting. And when 3:12 came, there were no knocks, no VHS tape, no whisper, just silence. She waited, breath held, eyes wide. And for the first time in days, the clock turned to 3:13. Relief bloomed so suddenly, it made her dizzy. Maybe it was over. Maybe breaking the mirrors had worked. She dared to sit,
to rest her eyes, to hope. But then, just as she stood to go turn off a light, she saw it. Not on a screen, not on a tape, but in the reflection of her own pupil's movement behind her. She turned around slowly, terrified. And standing in the hallway was her, grinning, wide, still, holding something in one hand, a VHS tape.
She didn't scream. She didn't move. All she could do was stare at the figure standing in the hallway. Same height, same shape, same tired eyes, but somehow wrong. Like the face was carved, not lived in. Its movements weren't violent. They weren't even fast. They were measured, slow, intentional, as if whatever was behind her eyes had studied the real, just long enough to perfect the performance. In its hand, the VHS tape gleamed dully under the hallway light. No markings, no dust, no fingerprints. She knew what it was without having to ask. She didn't want to see it. She didn't want to touch it, but her feet moved on their own, like her shadow had grown stronger than her bones. Step by step, she approached the thing wearing her face, and as she reached out for the tape, it placed it gently in her hand and vanished. No flicker, no fade, just gone, like it had only been a projection, a memory passing through her hallway like smoke. But the tape remained, real, solid, cold, for the first time, not warm. Her heart pounded so hard, it shook her ribs. Her ears rang with the force of it. She stared at the tape in her hand and didn't move for nearly 10 minutes. Then something inside her broke. The resistance, the hesitation, the illusion that ignoring it might somehow protect her. She staggered to the living room, where the VCR still sat, like an open wound. She inserted the tape with hands that no longer trembled. If it wanted her to watch, then she would. If this was a ritual, then fine, let it play out. But this time, she needed to know what it wanted, what it was becoming, what she was becoming. The screen lit up with that familiar static hum, flickering just long enough to feel like a heartbeat. Then came the image, her again. Of course, in the living room this time, but not sleeping, not motionless. Awake, eyes wide, staring directly into the camera. Her expression was blank, at first, almost peaceful. Then she began to speak, slowly, softly, but there was no sound. Her lips moved, forming syllables that didn't register, over and over. The same phrase. She leaned closer to the screen, watching her other self speak it again, and again, and again, until she recognized it, not from memory. From earlier that day, in the mirror, she had whispered something under her breath while washing her face. Something automatic, thoughtless. Now she remembered. She had said, "I don't know who I am anymore." And now the woman on the screen was saying it too, looping it like a mantra. The loop didn't stop. Her image continued, eyes empty, repeating the phrase without sound, each time with slightly different cadence, like it was rehearsing, practicing, becoming. Then something shifted in the background of the footage, just barely visible behind her seated figure. The hallway mirror came into focus. It had no reflection, no furniture, no light, just black, as if it had become a hole, a void, a portal, and from within that blackness, movement, subtle at first, a suggestion of limbs, a pale hand emerging, then a shoulder, a neck, and finally, a head, another head, crawling out. The woman on the screen didn't react. She kept speaking, kept smiling, as if this crawling, twisted version emerging from the mirror was expected. Invited, welcomed. The reflection had found a way through, and now there were two of her in the same room. One seated, one approaching. The image cut to black. She stared at the blank screen for nearly an hour, unmoving, tears dry on her cheeks, lips cracked open from breathing too shallowly. She felt like her body didn't fit her skin anymore, like something had started curling up inside her. She touched her face, felt for her own temperature, checked her pulse. She looked in the mirror, then immediately looked away. She didn't trust it. Not anymore. How could she? There was no way to know if it was her looking back. She covered it again with a sheet, but even behind the fabric she could feel it watching. That night, she slept in the kitchen with the lights on, back to the wall, gripping a pair of scissors like they could somehow sever what was happening inside her. But the fear wasn't from outside anymore. It was growing from within, a seed planted, fed with each knock. Each tape, at 3:12, the knock didn't come from the mirror. It didn't come from the door. This time it came from beneath the floorboards. Hollow, subtle, 3 soft thuds like fingernails tapping from the underside of her reality. She didn't respond. She didn't even flinch. The scissors stayed clutched in her hand, but her heart didn't race. Not this time, because this time she understood. It didn't matter where the knock came from. It would always find a way through. Through walls, through dreams, through film. It had already entered her voice, her face, her sleep. She had tried to cover the mirrors, delete the tapes, ignore the signs, but now she saw the truth. The thing that had been visiting her wasn't trying to harm her. It was trying to replace her. Slowly, lovingly, like taking over a house, one room at a time. By morning, she couldn't remember the last time she laughed, or called anyone, or left the house. She sat on the edge of her bed, bathed in sunlight that no longer felt real, and asked herself a single question: am I still me? There was no answer. But that night, when she passed by the living room on her way to the kitchen, she paused. The VCR was on. The screen was glowing. Another tape had already begun to play. But this time, she wasn't in it. The room was empty, the hallway empty. The house, still, and then, from the edge of the frame, a figure slowly walked into view. Not her, not a copy, but someone else. A new version, familiar, but older, tired, and smiling. As it sat down on the couch and turned to face the screen, it whispered a single word: finally. She hadn't recorded it. That much she was certain of. The latest tape had begun playing without her touch, the VCR glowing like a portal that no longer needed permission. The footage wasn't from her camera, nor from any angle she recognized. It was intimate, low to the ground, gliding silently through her home like something without feet. As she stood in the doorway watching it unfold, every hair on her body rose. She wasn't in this tape. There was no version of her smiling or speaking or sitting up in bed. Instead, there was only the house, empty, too empty. Even the sound was wrong, muffled, like a microphone buried beneath fabric, recording a place that didn't want to be remembered. The camera floated into her kitchen, paused at the fridge, then tilted, like a head cocking, like it was listening, or sniffing. She stepped back without realizing it, afraid to blink, afraid to miss something important. The footage moved again, now gliding toward the hallway, not rushed, not hunting, but deliberate, curious, as if it were learning the layout, marking it, like the creature, if it could be called that, was memorizing her reality, the same way a parasite maps a host. When the camera passed the hallway mirror, shattered only 2 nights before, there was a moment of static, a crackle, and for a single frame, her reflection flashed across the screen. Intact, standing, still, but not aligned with the camera's path. It had looked directly at her, not the lens. It was gone the next instant, but the after-image stayed behind her eyes, like a migraine waiting to bloom. Her knees locked, her breath shallowed. The tape was no longer just surveillance. It was now a blueprint, a rehearsal, a claim. It paused in front of her bedroom door, and again the camera tilted, like it was admiring the structure. Judging its shape, the door creaked open in the footage, but the real door behind her stayed still closed, still locked. She reached behind herself without turning, just to be sure. Cold brass, no movement. And yet on the tape, the door opened all the way, revealing the bed. The blankets were neat, undisturbed. The pillow perfectly centered. It was like a stage before the actor enters. The footage zoomed in slowly, as if the thing holding the camera wanted to be inside the bed, become the body that would lie there. When it finally pulled away, the image shifted, the frame darkened, and then silence. For over a full minute, the screen showed nothing but black, no sound, no cuts, just darkness. It made her chest tighten with pressure. Then something whispered, not from the speakers, from behind her, soft, a breath more than a word. But it was close, so close that her eardrum pulsed. She turned around instantly, but there was nothing. The room was empty, but the tape kept playing. Now it was back in the living room. The perspective hadn't changed, still low, gliding, but it seemed different now, slower, more intimate. It moved around the couch she sat on every night, paused at the bookshelf she hadn't dusted in weeks, tilted again at the family photo she kept on the windowsill. The frame had been cracked for years. The footage zoomed in on the crack, as if mocking her, studying her faults, her stains. It felt like being undressed, not physically, but soul deep. Then the screen cut to a final shot. Her front door. The camera stared at it. And then, in the silence, it knocked. 3 knocks, from inside the tape. Not real, not in the room, but perfectly replicated. Her body jumped anyway. Her brain couldn't tell the difference. She backed away from the VCR, as though it had grown teeth. The screen went black again, but this time it didn't shut off. It just lingered. And then letters appeared, slowly, as if typed by an invisible hand. One word, tomorrow. That was it. The tape stopped. The machine whirred to silence. The room became still again. But her thoughts didn't. Tomorrow. Not tonight. Not now. It was warning her. No, announcing something. She felt the date branded into her skull. It wasn't a threat. It was a schedule. She had until then. To do what? She didn't know. Escape. Burn the tapes. Leave the house. Kill the thing. If it could even be killed. She didn't know. All she knew was that the rules were changing. She stayed awake the rest of the night, pacing, muttering, praying to a god she wasn't sure she believed in. She tried to rationalize again. Maybe the tape was planted. Maybe she was being manipulated. But the whispers, the reflections, the copies of herself saying words she hadn't told anyone, it all added up to something bigger than technology. This wasn't a stalker. It wasn't some elaborate prank. It was ritualistic, designed. She felt like a mouse in a maze, running through pre-cut paths, while something watched from above, recording her every twitch and reaction. The word tomorrow repeated in her mind like a drumbeat. She didn't want to sleep, didn't want to dream. But when the sun finally rose, she collapsed into a shallow, disturbed nap. And in that sleep, she didn't see the monster. She became it, crawling, watching,
holding a tape labeled finale. When she woke, the day was half gone, the light outside already beginning its late afternoon slope. She moved like her limbs didn't belong to her anymore, slow, out of sync, like a borrowed body. She didn't eat, didn't speak. Every clock she passed pulled her closer to 3:12 the following morning. It wasn't about the time anymore. It was about the meaning behind it, that something would happen, that something had already happened. She checked the VCR. The tape was gone, just like the others. No ejection, no trace, only memory, only dread. She checked every room, every corner. No new mirrors, no new tapes. But the house felt different, heavier, like it was preparing for something too. Like the walls had been watching and were ready to open. At 7:06 p.m., the doorbell rang. Only once, a soft chime, and on the porch was another tape.
She didn't touch it right away. The tape sat on her porch like a black brick of dread, silent and ordinary, yet heavier than anything she'd ever lifted. The air around it seemed stiller, like even the wind didn't want to pass near it. No envelope, no markings, no writing, just that same matte plastic, anonymous and damning. She stood there in the doorway, staring down at it, with her heart thudding inside her chest, like fists against a locked door. This was the first time a tape had arrived in daylight. Until now, everything strange had waited for night, for the hour of shadows. But this one had broken the pattern. It hadn't waited. It didn't need to. That scared her more than any reflection or whisper. Whatever was behind these tapes no longer needed darkness. It had been invited in. And now it was making itself comfortable. Eventually she picked it up, but only because the idea of leaving it outside felt even more dangerous. What if someone else saw it? What if someone else touched it? Somehow, deep in her bones, she knew this wasn't just a message. It was a key, and she couldn't risk someone else unlocking the wrong door. Her fingers brushed the surface, expecting cold, but it was warm again, almost pulsing. She could swear the moment she held it. Her ears began to ring faintly, like feedback from an old microphone. She brought it inside, locked the door, bolted it, and placed the tape on the coffee table like it might explode. Then she sat across from it, watching, waiting. She didn't put it in the VCR. Not yet. The house was too bright. The sky outside still blue. Watching the tape in daylight felt like cheating, like skipping to the end of a nightmare. She waited until nightfall, waited until the windows turned black, and the light from the hallway cast long shadows against the floor. The same setting, the same dread, the same ritual, like everything had to be just right for the next chapter to begin. But still, she hesitated. What would this one show her? Another version of herself, another silent performance in the dead of night, another crawling thing pulling itself out of her walls. She wanted to burn it, wanted to bury it, but she knew that wouldn't help. The tapes always came back, or worse, they simply disappeared, like they had never existed, leaving her alone with memories no one else could see. The idea of destroying it was just theater. The truth was, the tape was always meant to be watched, and she was always meant to be the audience. With trembling hands, she inserted it into the VCR. The screen flickered, static again, but this time it was louder, sharper, like it wanted to cut through her. Then came the image, her living room, same couch, same table, but the timestamp didn't say 3:12. It said 7:06, the exact moment the tape had arrived on her porch. Her breath caught. The camera angle was low again, but unlike the other tapes, it didn't glide. It pulsed, like it was breathing. The footage showed the front door slowly creaking open, on its own. No figure, no hand, just a door swinging wide, like it had been summoned. Then came a sound she couldn't explain, a long scraping drag across the floorboards. Wood against wood, something being pushed inside, something she couldn't see. And then, a shadow. Brief, elongated. Wrong. The shadow didn't belong to anything in frame. It moved independently, like a puppet string had been yanked behind the scenes. It stretched from one corner of the living room to the other, thin and tall, gliding without feet. It paused in front of the couch, just out of view, and then the tape shook. Screen trembled for 3 full seconds, like the camera itself was afraid. When the picture stabilized, there she was again, seated on the couch. Not now, not real time, but on the screen. Except, she hadn't been there. She knew she hadn't. But there she sat, calm, composed, hands folded in her lap, staring at something off screen. She didn't blink, didn't move. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Then she leaned forward slightly, as if to listen to something no one else could hear. Her head turned toward the viewer, toward her, and then she spoke. Clear this time, audible, the first time any version of her had spoken on a tape with sound. Her voice was cold, toneless, steady. It said, "You've already seen it. You just haven't understood it yet." Then she smiled, not with joy, but with finality. And in that moment, the camera panned slightly, revealing a mirror in the corner of the room. She hadn't noticed it before, not in her actual house, not in memory, but it was there now on the screen. A freestanding, full-length mirror, angled just enough to reflect the couch. And in the mirror, the woman on the couch was missing. The reflection showed the room, the table, the couch, but not her. She wasn't there, as if she hadn't existed at all. The screen went black. Her body went cold. The tape ejected itself, and she understood something that made her bones ache. The woman she saw on the couch wasn't her anymore. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat back in the real version of that same couch, staring at the dead TV screen, feeling the outline of something impossible tightening around her life. She thought back to the first knock, the first grainy footage, the first sleep smile. It had all been leading somewhere, dragging her toward a point of no return. And now she saw it. The tapes weren't warnings. They were reminders of what she had already become. Slowly, quietly, each night taking a piece of her, each knock cutting deeper, each reflection more accurate than she was. She thought she could resist it, thought she could stay herself by covering mirrors, staying awake, refusing to watch. But resistance was a story she told herself to feel safe. This was never about fear. It was about repetition, becoming. The tapes didn't change her. They revealed her. The phone rang again that night. The landline. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She already knew what it would say. Nothing, just the sound of tape whirring in the background. A silent audience waiting for the final scene. She stared at the machine, at the stack of blank tapes on her shelf, untouched for years. She stood up, slowly, took one, inserted it into the VCR, hit record. Then she walked into the frame, sat on the couch, folded her hands in her lap, looked directly into the camera, and smiled. For the first time, the tape wasn't something she watched. It was something she made. The red record light blinked on the VCR, and the air in the room shifted. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier, like the pressure of eyes pressing against her skin. She sat motionless on the couch, letting the camera roll, wondering how long she could hold on to the last pieces of herself. Her thoughts flickered like a dying bulb. Was this surrender or defiance? A small voice inside her whispered that this was a trap, that the moment she hit record she had stepped onto a stage she could never leave. But another part, quieter, older, felt that this had always been inevitable. The tapes didn't come to her randomly. They were invitations, mirrors, and now she had turned the mirror around. She was the one making the message. But who was it for? The longer she sat there, the more detached she felt from her own body. Her face no longer a mask of fear, but something closer to calm, not peace, not numbness, but a kind of acceptance, as if the version of herself that had once screamed, fought and begged, was now watching from some forgotten corner. Minutes passed, then longer. She didn't speak, didn't move. And yet, somewhere deep within her she could feel it happening. Some subtle transference, like a thread being pulled out of her chest and stitched into the lens. Her eyes were dry, her mind quiet. No knock came, no whisper, just that little red light blinking like a pulse. She wondered if she'd already been filmed like this before, if one of the earlier tapes was simply this moment, from another angle, and if the woman she saw back then had been sitting right here, waiting too. Finally, she leaned forward and pressed stop. The machine clicked, the light died, the silence returned. But it wasn't relief, it was vacancy. The act of recording had taken something from her, something she couldn't name. She sat for a long time before ejecting the tape. When she did, she didn't label it, didn't even look at it, just set it gently on the coffee table, like leaving an offering. And then she stood and walked to the mirror in the hallway, the one she'd shattered, taped, then reassembled. Its frame now crooked, its glass jagged. The sheet she'd draped over it had fallen in the night. Her reflection stared back at her through cracks and distortions, but it was her, still her, though something in her eyes looked older, frayed, and in that fractured glass, something small moved behind her shoulder. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The movement wasn't physical. It was in the shape of the room, the rhythm of the air. Her reflection blinked out of sync for a moment, just a flicker, a stutter, and then returned to normal. She leaned in closer. Her heart didn't pound anymore. Her breathing didn't quicken. She wasn't afraid. She was curious. The mirror had always taken from her, her image, her trust, her sleep. But what if it could give something too? She reached out, palm against the cracked glass, and watched as her reflection slowly matched the movement, fingertips meeting hers at an unnatural delay, like it was thinking, like it was deciding whether or not to respond. And then, for the first time, her reflection smiled before she did, a slow, subtle grin that didn't quite reach the eyes. She didn't recoil, she just whispered, "What do you want?" And the answer came, not in words but in memory. Suddenly she wasn't in the hallway anymore. Not in her mind, she was somewhere else, someone else. A childhood bedroom, faint pink wallpaper, a boxy old TV glowing blue in the dark, and in front of it, a little girl. Her, maybe 7 years old, sitting cross-legged, eyes locked on the screen, transfixed by static. No tape playing, just noise. But she remembered this moment. She remembered her mother waking in the middle of the night, storming into the room, yanking the power cord from the wall and saying, "Don't ever watch nothing. It watches you back." She'd forgotten that memory for years. But now, It returned with unbearable clarity. She remembered what the static had sounded like. Not empty, not blank, but like whispering from under a pillow, like breathing from inside a wall. She hadn't watched nothing. She had watched something hiding in the shape of nothing. She staggered back from the mirror as the memory faded, the hallway returning around her like water, rushing back into a drained pool. Her knees buckled, hands trembling. Not from fear, from recognition. This didn't start with the first knock, not even the first tape. It started the night she watched the static. It started the moment she gave the screen her attention. All these years later, the thing had finally come to collect. That's what the tapes were. Not predictions, not performances, but interest payments. It had been watching her grow. It had filmed her childhood dreams, her sleepwalks, her reflections. It had worn her face like a rehearsal. And now, it was almost ready to step in completely, to replace her not with violence, but with memory, to become her from the inside out, while the rest of the world never noticed the difference. She picked up the latest tape, the one she had made. She stared at it for a long time, turning it over in her hands like a relic. Then she walked it out to the mailbox, placed it inside, raised the flag. She didn't know who would receive it, didn't know who would watch it next. But she understood the pattern now. The tape didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to whoever needed to see it next. The chain had to continue. The performance had to move forward. And maybe, just maybe, some version of her would live on in the static. Not as a warning, not as a victim, but as a witness. And as she turned back toward the house, she saw her reflection in the dark window, smiling. This time, it was her who smiled second. The night passed without a knock, without a whisper, without a tape. She sat awake until dawn, her hands resting idly on her lap, waiting, but not in fear anymore, in anticipation. The silence didn't comfort her. It made the room feel abandoned, like the stage had been struck, and the players had moved on. She had mailed the tape hours earlier, but even now she could still feel its weight in her hands, could still feel the recording, that red light blinking like a countdown in her veins. The moment she'd hit record, something inside her had changed. A line had been crossed, and now there was no going back. She didn't know who would find the tape. She didn't even know if someone would. But she felt deeply that it was never really about the recipient. It was about the transfer, and the story needed a new narrator. By mid-morning, the house felt hollow again, like whatever presence had lingered for nights had receded, leaving behind nothing but cold furniture and echoes. She tried to go about her routine, coffee, dishes, wiping down the kitchen counter, but everything felt off, like someone had rearranged her life by half an inch. The floor creaked under her feet in new places. The lights flickered once, then held steady, as if reconsidering. When she passed the hallway mirror again, her reflection moved normally, but the shape of her shoulders looked tired, heavy, like she'd been carrying something invisible. Maybe she had. Maybe every version of her that had ever been recorded still existed somewhere in the magnetic residue of those tapes, slowly bleeding into her, changing her from within. She didn't know what was real anymore, only that she was part of something now, something ongoing, something ancient. That evening, she made a decision she hadn't dared to consider before. She opened the old cabinet beneath the stairs, the one she hadn't touched since moving in. Inside, boxes of old family belongings, cables, cassette players, loose film rolls, and behind it all, her father's old camcorder. She pulled it out slowly, almost reverently, brushing off the dust with trembling fingers. It still worked. She wasn't sure why she had kept it all these years. Or maybe she was. Deep down, she'd always known the past would return in analog. She inserted a blank tape and stared into the lens, pressed record, and waited. At first, nothing happened. She sat there in silence, feeling stupid. But then something unexpected began to stir. Not outside her, but inside. Thoughts, images, faces she didn't recognize, rooms she'd never entered, voices whispering words she couldn't translate. But they were hers. Memories not born, but received. She watched the footage back, frame by frame, and what she saw chilled her blood. Her eyes in the footage weren't just distant. They were searching, as if watching something above and behind the camera. Her head would tilt suddenly, like hearing a name. Her mouth opened once, but no sound came. And when she paused the tape, right at the 10-minute mark, she saw it again, the shadow, the one from the earlier footage. Lurking in the corner, stretched unnaturally across the wall behind her. Not tall, not towering, but thin, like a person flattened by memory. It stood perfectly still, almost like part of the wallpaper, but its arm reached toward her shoulder, frozen in mid-motion. She stared at that frame for what felt like hours. 1,000 questions screamed in her mind, but only one stuck. How long had it been standing there, and how many tapes had she missed? The answer, she feared, was all of them. The next morning, she awoke to find the TV already on. The VCR humming gently, though no tape had been inserted. The screen was white. No static, just blank light. She stood there in front of it, unmoving. Then words began to appear across the screen, one letter at a time, slow, uneven, typed, in silence. Stop recording. That was all. Just those 2 words. But they knocked the breath from her lungs, like a blow to the chest. She hadn't told anyone about the camcorder. No one had been in the house. No new tapes had arrived. And yet, something somewhere knew. Was the message a threat? A plea? A warning? She didn't know. But what terrified her most was that she wasn't sure she could stop. Because with every recording, she felt more herself, and less like the person she had been before the knocks started. That night, for the first time in weeks, she dreamed. But it wasn't her dream. She was in a field, endless, grassy, overcast skies above, and all around her, people, hundreds of them, all standing still, holding VHS tapes in their hands. No one spoke, no one moved, and at the center of the field stood a mirror, tall, freestanding, its surface rippling like water. One by one, the people stepped forward and placed their tapes at its base, and one by one, they disappeared, vanished the moment they looked into their own reflection. She was the last one standing, her own tape in her hand, and when she approached the mirror and looked into it, she saw nothing. No face, no eyes, just the screen, playing her life back at her, in reverse, faster and faster, until it ended on a single frame, her as a child, smiling, holding a camera. She woke up crying, not from fear, but from loss. Something was gone from her, taken in the night, and she knew, without question, that her time was running out. The tapes weren't just memories, they were blueprints, replacements, proof of her existence, and tools for erasing it. Every frame copied was a frame lost. She didn't know how many versions of herself still existed in magnetic grain. But the woman who had first received that unmarked tape, the one who had once screamed at the knocks, who had stayed awake all night, trembling,
who had broken mirrors and begged for answers, was already fading, replaced by the one who now recorded willingly, who smiled at reflections, who mailed the tapes herself, and as she stood before the mirror, one last time, she whispered the words aloud, softly, sadly, "I don't know who I am anymore."
She hadn't noticed the second tape until the mailman was gone. It wasn't in the mailbox. It was on her doorstep again, just like before. No envelope, no writing, just sitting there beside her morning paper, like a gift she never asked for. But something about this one felt wrong. Not just ominous wrong. The weight was different when she picked it up, like it wasn't filled with magnetic tape, but something heavier, slower, alive. She brought it inside, but didn't watch it immediately. Not this time. For the first time since all this started, she was afraid not of what was on the tape, but of what it would take from her once it played. It had been days since she'd seen her own face and trusted it. Even now, her reflection in the TV screen stared back with the faintest delay. Always that delay. She set the tape on the table and walked away. She tried cleaning, dishes, windows, laundry, anything to distract herself from the knowledge that it was there. But it pulled on her mind like gravity. Like the longer it sat unwatched, the more powerful it became. That night, while brushing her teeth, she caught a flicker in the corner of the bathroom mirror. Just her reflection, half turned. Nothing more, but her heart thumped anyway. She turned fast, just in case, but the room was empty. Again, she left the light on when she went to bed. The tape still untouched on the table. She thought maybe she could ignore it, let it gather dust. But sometime after midnight, she heard the soft click of the VCR turning on by itself. Then the mechanical whir of the tape pulling itself in. She got up slowly, stepped into the living room like someone approaching a grave. The TV was on, already displaying the first frame. Not static, not her house, but something stranger. A roadside gas station, deserted, filmed at night. A single flickering streetlight illuminated an old payphone, and under it, her, or at least someone who looked like her. Same posture, same hair, same jeans she hadn't worn in years. This version stood there staring at the payphone with her back to the camera. She didn't move, not even when a car drove past behind her in the far background. Just kept staring, like she was waiting for it to ring. And then, it did. Loud, sharp, echoing through the quiet. The figure picked up the receiver and raised it to her ear. Her shoulders tensed slightly, and then she laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was hollow, distant, almost like it didn't belong to her at all. The kind of laugh someone lets out when they're remembering something awful. But the pain's gone cold. The image distorted briefly, like the camera itself couldn't handle the sound. Then came the worst part. The woman on screen turned around, slowly, and looked directly into the lens, not at it, through time, through space, through whatever layer of reality separated her from the one watching. And her face, her eyes were full of something, neither entirely human, nor entirely wrong. She smiled, softly, sadly, like she recognized the viewer, like she missed her. The camera zoomed in and whispered, "Found you." The screen went black. She screamed then, a dry, throat-wrenching sound that didn't echo the way it should have, as if the walls had stopped reflecting noise. She ripped the tape out of the VCR, dropped it on the ground, and stomped it with both feet. The plastic cracked, splintered, shattered, but it didn't bleed film. It bled something darker. Inside, Instead of the usual ribbon of magnetic tape, there was a thin sheet of mirrored glass, cut perfectly to the shape of the reel. She picked up one jagged piece and saw her own face again, but smiling, a wide, full smile she hadn't made in months. That wasn't hers anymore. She dropped the shard, backed away. Something was wrong with her reality. The rules were shifting, and every tape she received was less like a message and more like an anchor, holding her somewhere she no longer recognized. The next morning, the mirror in the hallway was gone. Not broken, not covered, gone, just missing. In its place was a hole in the wall, not gaping, not violent, clean, smooth, as if it had always been there. She stared into it, heart pounding, but saw only black. No drywall, no beams, just darkness that seemed to move gently, like water stirred by breath. She felt drawn toward it. She thought she heard something, music, maybe, a faint hum, or was it static? She didn't lean closer, not yet, but she knew what this meant. Something had come through, something had entered her house, not just symbolically, not just through tape or dream, but physically. She wasn't alone anymore, and the worst part, she wasn't sure if she ever had been. She tried to call someone, anyone, but her phone, landline and cell, both played the same sound. When she dialed out her own voice, laughing, then whispering, too late, she threw them both across the room, shaking, sweating, terrified beyond what her body could even express. But part of her wasn't surprised. Part of her had been expecting this. And that's when she realized she wasn't afraid of being replaced anymore. She was afraid she already had been. She stopped trusting her own voice. Every sound she made, every sigh, every whisper, every cry, felt like an echo she hadn't chosen. She would speak, and then seconds later, she'd hear it again, muffled, slightly off, as if someone else was practicing her tone in the other room. But when she checked, nothing, always nothing. She started walking through her house with her hands trembling slightly, flinching at the walls like they might pulse again, listening for that low, hungry hum from the black hole where the mirror used to be. At times, it did hum. At others, it seemed to breathe. But the worst were the moments it fell, utterly silent, like something had stepped away from it, like something had entered the room. She began to talk to it, not out of madness, but survival. I know you're watching, she'd whisper, but I'm watching too. That night, the knock came again, but not from the door. This time, it came from inside the house. 3 dull thuds on the wall behind her bedroom headboard. Not loud, not frantic, just casual, as if whatever was knocking had lived there far longer than she had, and was simply returning to its place. She didn't get up. She couldn't. She stayed beneath the covers, body stiff, eyes wide. She knew it wasn't trying to scare her anymore. That part of the ritual was done. What it wanted now wasn't panic. It was recognition. It didn't need her to fear it. It needed her to mirror it, to accept it. And as much as she resisted, some small part of her, a voice deep in her chest, was already beginning to understand what that meant. She whispered to the dark, "I won't become you," the knock answered. 3 more. In the morning, the front door was wide open. She knew she had locked it. Deadbolt, chain. She stood in the hallway for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the empty doorway. The sky outside was calm, the street quiet, but something was different. It wasn't what was missing. It was what wasn't supposed to be there. A single silver-framed photo on the floor, just inside the threshold. She didn't own it. She'd never seen it. But the image inside it made her knees weaken. Sitting on her living room couch, smiling gently at someone just out of frame. Her clothes were clean, her hair combed. She looked rested, like a version of herself from years ago. But her eyes, they weren't hers. There was something behind them, like light hitting the wrong side of a mask. She flipped the photo over. On the back, a note. Stay still. It's almost done. She dropped the photo. Her hands were shaking too badly to hold anything. The photo didn't shatter. It simply landed flat, face up, the image staring toward the ceiling. The message didn't make sense. What was almost done? The recordings? The haunting? Or her? She felt dizzy, her ears ringing again like they had when she first touched the warm tape. She walked to the kitchen and splashed water on her face. For a moment she didn't see her reflection in the sink faucet, just darkness, as if her own image had stepped away. She stared longer. Eventually it returned, but only after she blinked, a beat too late. The delay was worsening. Her own presence was becoming fragmented, delayed, overwritten. She ran to the bathroom mirror and screamed into it, just to see if the mouth on the other side would match. It didn't. It smiled again. That night, another tape appeared on the table. This time, she didn't find it. It found her. She returned from the bathroom to see the TV already on, the VCR blinking, the tape halfway inserted. She hadn't heard anything. No knock, no noise, but it had arrived anyway. She sat down staring at it, like a person about to step into the ocean at night. Slowly, she pushed the tape in. The screen flickered. Static. Then footage of her bedroom, not from a low angle this time, but from above, as if the ceiling had eyes. She was asleep in the bed, curled, still, peaceful. The camera didn't move. The footage didn't cut. But something changed in the shadows near the foot of the bed. They thickened, drew closer, until a shape emerged, not crawling, not slithering, but simply appearing, pixel by pixel, until it stood upright. Watching her sleep, it stood there for nearly 5 minutes, breathing, shifting slightly, its limbs long and blurred. It had no face, no form, just absence, shaped like a person. But it was wearing her hoodie, the same one she'd thrown out 2 weeks ago, and on its wrist, her broken watch, the one she hadn't seen since the first knock. Slowly, it tilted its head, and the camera responded, tilted, too, in sync, like a dance, like a greeting. Then the figure turned toward the camera, and raised a hand, open palm, a wave. It stepped closer, so close its form filled the screen. And then the footage glitched, warped, lines raced across the screen, as if the camera was choking on what it had captured. The tape ended there. No message, no final word, just silence. But the implications rang louder than any scream. The figure wasn't entering her house. It was replacing her inside it. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Instead, she lit every light in the house, opened every curtain, kept every mirror uncovered. If it wanted to take her, she would make sure it had to look her in the eyes to do it. She sat up in bed, camera on, recording herself again, not for fear but for proof, for whoever came after. If she vanished, the tape would remain. Maybe someone would find it. Maybe someone would learn. But a part of her doubted that. She was starting to see the bigger picture now. This wasn't about haunting. It wasn't even about obsession. It was about rewriting. Like her life was a film being reshot, scene by scene, until the original was forgotten. The knocks,
The reflections, the laughter, they were all edits, corrections, and she was the only error left to be resolved.
The recording ran all night. She sat there unmoving, staring straight into the lens, daring it to blink first. The tape inside the camcorder clicked as it reached the end, rewound automatically with a mechanical sigh, and then ejected itself like it had finished documenting the final chapter. But nothing had changed. No knock, no whisper, no flicker in the mirror, just silence. And in that silence, she began to feel it again, the subtle ache of unreality, like the air in her house didn't belong to her anymore, like it had been filtered, softened, retouched. She got up slowly and walked from room to room, trying to remember the way things used to feel. But every corner, every familiar object had the unmistakable sense of having been staged, set dressing for someone else's story. Her memories no longer belonged to her. They belonged to whatever was studying her from behind the lens. In the kitchen, the clock above the sink spun forward 5 minutes. Every time she looked away, she tested it, deliberately turned around, waited, looked back, always faster. And yet her watch stayed frozen at 3:12 a.m., the time of the original knock. The moment it all began, she stood there with both devices in hand, feeling like time itself was collapsing around her. Then the lights dimmed, not flickering, but fading, like a spotlight at the end of a scene. Her house was becoming a set, a sound stage. She wasn't being haunted anymore. She was being directed. Someone, something, was positioning her for the final act. She ran to the front door, flung it open, but outside there was nothing. No cars, no wind, no sound, just an empty street, unnaturally still, like the world had been paused for her convenience. She stepped outside anyway. The air felt thick, humid with silence. And across the street, her neighbor's house, once familiar, warmly lit, lived in, was now dark and flat. Not just empty, but lifeless. The windows had no glass, just darkness behind them, like someone had forgotten to build the rest of the house. She walked to the sidewalk and noticed that the leaves on the trees weren't moving, not even with her breath. When she reached out to touch one, her finger passed through it. Not cold, not warm, just absent. It wasn't real. None of it. Her street, her world, her past, all of it had been reduced to a backdrop. A set design. She turned around slowly, and for the first time, she realized the horrifying truth. There were no cameras, because the camera had always been her. When she returned inside, the living room had changed, subtly. The couch had moved half an inch. The plant in the corner was missing, and the photograph, the one she'd found on her doorstep, was now framed and hanging on the wall as if it had always belonged there. The version of herself in the picture still smiled gently, but the background had shifted too. She zoomed in. On the table beside that, there was a tape, different from the others, white labeled, handwritten text. She couldn't read it, but it looked familiar, too familiar. She turned her head toward her real table, and there it was. The same tape, now sitting in plain view, though she hadn't put it there. She hadn't even seen it arrive. She stared at it, like one might stare at a bomb, counting down. Her legs moved on their own, toward it, toward the end. She inserted the tape into the VCR without thinking. Her fingers trembled, but her arms obeyed something deeper than fear now. The screen came alive, but the footage wasn't her home. It was a hallway, long, endless, lit by flickering fluorescence. She could hear her own breathing coming from the speakers, not in rhythm with her actual breath,
but recorded, timed, like the tape was watching her in real time while it played. And then came the footsteps, loud, bare, slapping against linoleum floors. A woman appeared at the far end of the hall, running, her hair matted, eyes wild, her clothes stained, but it was unmistakably her. She panted, turned around, slammed into a wall, clawed at a locked door, and behind her, something massive approached. No shape, just absence, once again. The outline of something too large to exist, yet squeezing through a space not meant for it. The camera zoomed in on her face as she screamed, not just in terror, but in recognition. She wasn't running from something. She was running toward herself, toward the screen, toward the viewer. The sound cut out. Her mouth still moved, but the tape went utterly silent. Then the screen fractured, not glitched, fractured, as if it were made of glass, and someone had punched straight through the video itself. And in that shattering, she saw every version of herself across every tape, sleeping, laughing, crying, smiling, superimposed atop one another in a kaleidoscope of distortion. One mouth, 100 voices, all speaking in unison. You are the recording now. She blacked out, not from pain, not from fear, but from acceptance. When she awoke, it was morning. The tape was gone. The VCR, empty. Her house, normal again. No shifting shadows, no missing walls. The hallway mirror had returned, clean and spotless. Her phone worked. A bird sang outside. It was peaceful, ordinary. She stood there, barefoot, breathing slowly, and then she saw it on the coffee table. A single white-labeled VHS tape. But this time, the writing was clear, sharp, in her own handwriting. Final cut.
She didn't watch the tape right away. Not this time. The words, "Final cut," stared up at her from the label like a verdict, not a title. Her handwriting was neat, precise, but her hands trembled when she traced the letters. She had no memory of writing them, no memory of making this tape, and yet everything about it felt familiar, like a memory from a dream she couldn't quite wake from. The room felt warmer than usual, brighter, but not comforting. It was like the set lights had been turned up for one final take, and she was the only actor left. She stared at the tape sitting beside her tea, beside her phone, beside her own trembling reflection in the black TV screen. Then she heard something new. Laughter, quiet, soft, childlike, coming not from the house, but from inside the tape. She nearly dropped it. The laughter had no source, no distortion. It wasn't recorded on the tape. It lived in it, like something was already playing before the tape even entered the VCR. She held it in both hands, trying to decide whether to destroy it or surrender to it. But it felt final, not threatening, not inviting, just inevitable. And maybe that was the most terrifying part of all, that this didn't feel like a climax anymore. It felt like the closing credits, a slow fade out. Not with screams, but with resignation. She inserted the tape. The machine whirred softly. No glitch this time. No pause. Just a clean, deliberate cue-up. The screen filled with static that pulsed like breath. And then, slowly, the picture came into focus. It was her living room. Present day. Same clothes. Same sunlight pouring through the curtains. But she wasn't on the couch. She wasn't standing behind the camera. She wasn't anywhere. Just an empty frame. The room stayed like that for a full minute. Then came the knocking, soft at first, deliberate. 3 slow thuds from the back of the house. Not the door, not the walls, but the floor. Then movement, on screen, and in her own home. She turned her head slowly toward the hallway. No one there, but on the screen, a figure emerged into the frame. A woman, calm, quiet, smiling. It was her. Yes, but not quite. Her eyes were darker, her movements too graceful. She sat where she should have been sitting, tilted her head, looked directly at the camera, and then said the words she'd been dreading for weeks. "I think it's time we switched." She stumbled back from the TV, heart pounding like a war drum. The woman on screen smiled wider. Not cruel, not warm, just certain. She rose from the couch and walked slowly toward the camera. And as she did, the screen began to blur. Not visually, but emotionally. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing anymore. Her heart knew it was wrong, but her soul felt drawn to it. When the figure reached the camera, she reached toward the screen, palm outward, and outside the television, in her own living room, she felt the air move in front of her chest, as if someone else's hand had reached through from the other side. A breeze, a breath, a presence. She couldn't run, her legs wouldn't move, and in that paralysis, she understood she wasn't being pulled into the tape. She had already been filmed entering it. The screen went dark for a moment, and then flickered again, this time showing her, standing where the figure had stood, smiling into the lens. But not now, not this her. The one on screen looked relieved, content, whole. And then as the camera zoomed out, the house around her looked different. The photos on the wall were new, the plants full, the clock ticking normally. A clean, lived-in place, her real home, as it had been before all of this. Before the knock, before the first tape, she was back inside the memory, or at least her image was. And somewhere, somehow, the woman watching from the other side had taken her place. She looked around her living room now, her real one, and saw that it didn't quite match anymore. It was similar, but colder, sparser, as if the world she lived in was just a replica. And then came the knock, louder this time, from the hallway, from the inside. 3 thuds, followed by the sound of static bleeding into the air. Not from the TV, but from the walls. She turned slowly, resisting the urge to cry. Not because she wasn't scared, but because fear had become useless. The only thing left now was truth. She walked into the hallway. It was longer than it should have been. More shadows, no light. She passed the mirror, but it didn't show her anymore. Just the hallway behind her. And in that reflection, she saw the woman, her twin, her shadow, walking just a few steps behind, arms by her sides, head tilted in mimicry. She reached the bedroom door, opened it, and inside, the TV was already on. But instead of showing footage, it showed her, right now, watching herself being watched. Her copy stepped into the room, quiet, graceful, smiling. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The message was clear. There was no violence, no chase, just a gentle presence and a soft exchange. The copy walked to the bed, sat down, and pointed to the camcorder on the nightstand. A red light blinked. It had been recording the entire time. Slowly, she walked toward it, and for a moment, just one, she imagined what might happen if she smashed it, if she grabbed the tape and ran, if she screamed until her voice shattered glass. But that wouldn't change anything, because her scream would only be recorded, her run only looped, her defiance only copied. The only choice left, the only real action, was to sit down. So she did, next to her, beside herself, and together they smiled at the camera. The tape ended. The day passed without interruption. No knock, No tape, no shifts in the mirror. Just silence, steady and undisturbed, as if the world had finally exhaled after weeks of holding its breath. She moved through the house like someone revisiting a dream, familiar enough to walk through with confidence, but different enough to doubt every door. The furniture was in the right place. The clocks ticked normally. Her reflection mirrored her movement exactly, but there was something missing. A weight in the air that used to press against her chest was gone, and in its place, a peculiar hollowness, not peace, emptiness. She didn't feel safe. She felt released, like whatever had been watching her had moved on to something else. Or worse, finished watching. The camera in her mind had stopped rolling, and now there was only the strange, unbearable stillness of being unobserved. She wandered from room to room, trying to reclaim ownership of the space. She opened drawers she hadn't touched in years, found birthday cards with her name on them, notes she'd written to herself in moments of fear and solitude, but they didn't feel like hers. The handwriting was too careful, the phrasing too foreign. "Remember who you are," one sticky note read, taped inside a book she didn't remember reading. Another one in the kitchen drawer, "Do not follow the knock," as if a past version of herself had tried to warn her through paper trails, but the person leaving the messages no longer existed. She didn't feel haunted anymore. She felt replaced. And the most terrifying part of that was how normal it had become. The strangeness had dulled, and she found herself walking barefoot across her kitchen tiles without even checking the windows anymore. The mirror returned, not with a sound or a flash, but subtly. It was just there again, in the hallway where it had always been. And this time, when she passed by, her reflection was perfect. It matched her step for step, blink for blink, but she didn't trust it. Not after everything. She stopped in front of it and stared, testing for hesitation, waiting for her image to betray itself. It didn't. Her hand moved. So did the one in the glass, but there was a faint delay. A hair of a second, like the signal had to travel farther now, like it was passing through something in between. She raised both arms slowly. Her reflection followed. She smiled. It smiled, but the difference was there, in the eyes. One pair of eyes watched with wonder. The other watched with pity. The kind of pity you feel when looking at something that no longer knows what it is. That night, she dreamed in black and white. It wasn't a nightmare. It was archival, like someone had pulled her consciousness into an old tape. She found herself walking through a version of her childhood home, only slightly off. The kitchen was too small, the hallway too long. The pictures on the walls showed people with blurred out faces. She opened doors and found versions of herself, sleeping, reading, crying, each frozen in their moments, like mannequins left out under a flickering light. In one room, she saw herself kneeling beside a television, holding a remote, looking up at the screen with wide, expectant eyes. On the TV, footage of her present-day self, standing in the hallway mirror. The connection looped, image feeding into image, past watching present, and neither fully aware of the other. It wasn't a haunting, it was a reunion between every version of herself she had been, and none of them recognized each other. She awoke with tears on her cheeks, not from fear, from grief. She had lost something irreversible. The version of her who once lived alone, who feared the knocking, who paced with a knife in her hand and a flashlight at the ready, that woman was gone. Not dead, not taken, just dissolved, absorbed into the strange, looping narrative that had overtaken her life. She no longer wanted to escape. She wanted to understand why the tapes had started. Who sent them?
why they kept escalating. She thought of the last one, the final cut, and realized something she hadn't before. It had never shown an end, just a trade, a switch. One version of her stepping in, the other fading out. But what happened after that? Who filmed the footage? Who watched it? She hadn't touched a camera since then, but she felt constantly filmed, like a gaze followed her from behind the drywall. She turned off every light in the house, sat in darkness, waited. No camera, no whisper, no tape, but something in her blood vibrated, a quiet humming in her spine. She stood and walked to the closet, the one she'd barricaded after the first knock weeks ago. It was unsealed now. She didn't remember opening it, but the door creaked easily when she pulled it, revealing shelves of old blankets, boxes, and at the very back, something new. A small black box, rectangular, with a red blinking light. Not a tape, a camcorder, old, dusty, still warm. She picked it up and checked the screen. It was on, recording, and the timestamp said it had been filming for 21 minutes. But the screen didn't show her. It showed her bedroom, empty, still, waiting. She hadn't been in there all day, and the tape inside, already labeled playback. She didn't press play, not yet.
The camcorder was heavy in her hands, too heavy, like it had been recording more than just images, like it had captured time itself, compressed into plastic and tape and whirring silence. She sat on the floor of the hallway, back against the wall, the device resting in her lap, like a confession she wasn't ready to hear. The blinking red light no longer felt urgent. It felt patient, pulsing like a quiet heartbeat. She stared at the word on the label again. Playback. And in that word was a question she didn't want to ask out loud. Playback. Of what? Of her. Of something else wearing her skin. The longer she stared at the camcorder, the more it felt like it was watching her. Not from the lens, but from the inside. As if something lived in the tape now, waiting to be remembered. She didn't go to the living room to play it. She didn't trust the VCR anymore. She plugged the camcorder into an old TV in the hallway, one she hadn't used in years. It sparked, buzzed, came to life reluctantly. The moment she hit play, the room went cold. Not with wind, not with presence, but with absence. As if something had just been sucked out. The footage flickered and began. A room, her bedroom, still, silent. The camera sat motionless on a dresser, its view capturing the entire space from a corner angle. Nothing happened for the first minute. Then the door creaked open, slowly, but no one entered. No shadow, no step, just the sound. Then from the left side of the screen she appeared, or a version of her. Not frantic, not afraid, calm, composed, walking backward, as if being returned. She paused the footage. Her heart was hammering in her chest, fingers twitching near the buttons. The timestamp confirmed it. This was last night, exactly the hour she'd fallen asleep on the couch. But the figure on screen, her double, was already in the bedroom. She played the footage again, slowly. The double walked in reverse until her legs hit the bed, then sat down, still backward, and lowered herself onto the mattress. Her head hit the pillow, eyes closed. Then in a quiet, seamless motion, the tape reversed itself. Not visibly, structurally. The footage wasn't being rewound. It was undoing. Time flowing backward by choice. And when the figure on the bed exhaled one last breath, the room flickered. The lights pulsed, and for a single frame, just one, something else appeared in her place. Not a body, not a figure, a void, shaped like a person, but black, shifting, watching. The tape ended with static, but even after she powered off the camcorder, the hum didn't stop. It had migrated into the walls, into the fabric of the house. The pipes creaked with it. The floorboards sighed beneath it, as if the recording had planted something, and now that something was growing, she stood up and walked back to her bedroom. Not out of curiosity, but necessity. She had to know if the bed felt different. It did. The mattress was cold. Not just chilly, cold, as if someone had just gotten up, but she hadn't been in it all night. She looked at the pillow and saw a single strand of hair too long to be hers, too black. Her hair had grayed at the edges since the tapes began. This was before someone had come here, someone wearing her body from a different time, or a different version of time. She ran to the closet again, dug through every box, every drawer, looking for more tapes, more proof. She didn't find any. But she did find photographs, dozens of them, none labeled, all aged, yellowed at the corners, like they'd existed longer than she had. And in every single one, her sometimes alone, sometimes walking with her back turned, sometimes asleep, but always unaware, always observed. And the most disturbing part wasn't that she was in them, it was the environment. The backgrounds kept changing. Rooms she didn't recognize, buildings she'd never entered, versions of her home that weren't hers. One photo showed her in a living room with 3 couches she never bought. Another showed her brushing her teeth in a mirror that had never been installed. She flipped through them faster, heart rising. She was being catalogued, collected, like something had been studying all the iterations of her across a dozen realities. The final photo stopped her cold. It was her, lying in a hospital bed, tubes in her arms, eyes closed, a nurse just barely out of focus in the background. The date on the back was smudged, but the corner bore a hospital logo she vaguely recognized from a town 2 states over. She'd never been admitted there, never visited it, but she recognized the image in her bones, not as a memory, as a destination. Like her body had already been there, waiting for her consciousness to catch up. And in that moment, the gravity of her situation shifted. The tapes weren't warnings, they weren't curses, they were breadcrumbs. A path laid out by something that wasn't trying to torment her. It was trying to prepare her. Not for death, not even for replacement, but for reintegration. A merging of every her that had ever been fragmented, lost or recorded. And that's when the knock returned. This time from under the floorboards, soft, gentle, familiar, 3 times, then silence. Then a 4th knock, off-beat, out of rhythm. An invitation. She stood there, not afraid anymore. Just aware. The room around her felt thinner, the light dimmer, as if reality was stretching to hold her weight. She walked to the hallway mirror, looked deep into her reflection, and for the first time her reflection didn't smile. It just watched, not with malice, not with sadness, but with understanding, like the person in the glass wasn't trying to escape. She was trying to return. The knock came again, this time from behind the mirror. She stood in front of the hallway mirror, not as a woman looking at her reflection, but as a question looking at its answer. The 4th knock still echoed behind the glass, soft and stubborn, like the heartbeat of something buried beneath years of stillness. She didn't move, not because she was frozen, but because movement felt irrelevant now. Everything about this felt rehearsed, as if this moment, this silence, this stare down between her and her own eyes had been filmed before and was now playing itself out again. She lifted a hand slowly and touched the mirror. It was colder than usual, Not glass cold, basement cold. A damp, hollow chill that pressed back with the weight of something deeper than reflection, something behind it. Not just watching, waiting. And that fourth knock hadn't asked to be noticed. It had asked to be answered. A crack bloomed in the corner of the mirror. Not loud, not sudden. Just a thin, quiet line crawling from the edge toward the center, like a fracture in reality itself. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned closer, studied it. The crack wasn't random. It curved deliberately, arcing like a spiral. And at the heart of the spiral, something began to show. Not a reflection. A scene, dim, grainy, like the beginning of a VHS tape warming up. Her reflection faded completely now, replaced by a hallway she recognized, but older, dustier. The walls had cracks in places her home did not, and at the far end, a door she'd never seen before. The spiral glowed faintly, pulsing like a living eye. She should have run, she knew that, but something in her chest, a hunger, an ache, pulled her forward, not toward fear, but toward recognition. She pressed her palm flat against the center of the spiral. The mirror gave way, not like glass, but like water held under pressure. Her hand passed through, her wrist, her arm, and then the rest of her followed. No wind, no resistance, just a quiet exhale of a world that had already let go of her. The passage was brief, a blink, and then she stood on the other side. In the hallway from the vision, dust clung to the corners. The lights buzzed overhead, flickering with a rhythm that didn't match any sound she'd ever known. The air smelled of static, and something older, like time itself, had gone stale. She turned around expecting to see the mirror, to see the way back. But there was only a wall now, cracked, humming slightly, as if it remembered being a doorway. She walked slowly toward the strange door at the end of the hallway. Her footsteps made no sound. The floor absorbed everything, her weight, her doubt, her fear. The door wasn't locked. It wasn't even latched. It opened before she touched it. And beyond it, another room, empty, save for one thing, an old TV on a metal cart, flickering softly. No tape inside, no camcorder, just the image already playing. And on the screen herself, not live, not staged, but real. A memory. She watched as she stood in her kitchen, opening a drawer, pulling out a knife. Her lips moved. She remembered this day, weeks ago. Before the second tape, she'd thought she was alone, thought she was just being paranoid. But in the footage behind her, just outside the window, was a figure, watching, still, wearing her face. She stumbled backward. The room didn't change. The screen didn't stop. Another scene followed, her asleep on the couch, the TV glowing in the background. But this time, the couch wasn't empty. Someone else sat at the far end, barely visible, motionless, and the timestamp on the screen. 3 days ago, she had never seen anyone, had no memory of it. But there it was, captured, confirmed, and the final clip, her standing in front of the mirror just minutes ago, pressing her hand into the glass. But in the footage, she didn't go through. She stood there, still, staring, and behind her reflection, someone else passed through the glass, quietly, gently, into the room behind her. The message was clear. She hadn't crossed into another place. She had been lured here, while something else had taken her place. She turned to leave, ran back into the hallway, but it stretched now, longer, darker, endless. Doorways on either side began appearing, one after another, each slightly ajar. From within them, soft sounds emerged, breathing, whispering, and worse tapes, rewinding, like dozens of VCRs winding back toward the start, eager to replay everything. She kept walking, but every door she passed pulled at her with invisible strings. One showed her crying in a bathtub she didn't own. Another showed her laughing with friends she didn't recognize. Another showed her getting married to a man whose face was always blurred. She had never lived these moments, and yet she remembered the emotions. Her chest ached with the echoes of joys and heartbreaks she'd never had. These were other versions of her, lives she could have lived, or maybe had, recorded, stored, archived. And at the very end of the hall, a final door, larger, closed tight, painted black, a single word carved into it. Yours, not mine, not theirs, just yours. She touched the handle and felt heat pulse through her fingertips. Inside was the answer, the original, the place it all began. She turned the knob, slowly. The door creaked open, and there at the center of a room, with no walls, no floor, no sky, stood a single object, a mirror, cracked, old, and in its reflection, no hallway, no room, just a woman, staring back, smiling, not her, but someone very close, too close. The woman lifted a hand and tapped once, twice, 3 times on the glass. Then a fourth, the knock, and on the floor beneath the mirror sat a new tape, labeled, Begin Again. Like time itself had gone stale, she turned around expecting to see the mirror, to see the way back. But there was only a wall now, cracked, humming slightly, as if it remembered being a doorway. She walked slowly toward the strange door at the end of the hallway. Her footsteps made no sound. The floor absorbed everything, her weight, her doubt, her fear. The door wasn't locked. It wasn't even latched. It opened before she touched it. And beyond it, another room, empty, save for one thing, an old TV on a metal cart, flickering softly. No tape inside. No camcorder, just the image already playing, and on the screen herself, not live, not staged, but real, a memory. She watched as she stood in her kitchen, opening a drawer, pulling out a knife. Her lips moved. She remembered this day, weeks ago. Before the second tape, she'd thought she was alone, thought she was just being paranoid. But in the footage behind her, just outside the window, was a figure, watching, still, wearing her face. She stumbled backward. The room didn't change. The screen didn't stop. Another scene followed, her asleep on the couch, the TV glowing in the background. But this time, the couch wasn't empty. Someone else sat at the far end, barely visible, motionless, and the timestamp on the screen. 3 days ago, she had never seen anyone, had no memory of it. But there it was, captured, confirmed, and the final clip, her standing in front of the mirror just minutes ago, pressing her hand into the glass. But in the footage, she didn't go through. She stood there, still, staring, and behind her reflection, someone else passed through the glass, quietly, gently, into the room behind her. The message was clear. She hadn't crossed into another place. She had been lured here, while something else had taken her place. She turned to leave, ran back into the hallway, but it stretched now, longer, darker, endless. Doorways on either side began appearing, one after another, each slightly ajar. From within them, soft sounds emerged. Breathing, whispering, and worse tapes, rewinding, like dozens of VCRs winding back toward the start, eager to replay everything. She kept walking, but every door she passed
pulled at her with invisible strings. One showed her crying in a bathtub she didn't own. Another showed her laughing with friends she didn't recognize. Another showed her getting married to a man whose face was always blurred. She had never lived these moments, and yet she remembered the emotions. Her chest ached with the echoes of joys and heartbreaks she'd never had. These were other versions of her, lives she could have lived, or maybe had, recorded, stored, archived. And at the very end of the hall, a final door, larger, closed tight, painted black, a single word carved into it. Yours, not mine, not theirs, just yours. She touched the handle and felt heat pulse through her fingertips. Inside was the answer, the original, the place it all began. She turned the knob, slowly. The door creaked open, and there at the center of a room, with no walls, no floor, no sky, stood a single object, a mirror, cracked, old, and in its reflection, no hallway, no room, just a woman, staring back, smiling, not her, but someone very close, too close. The woman lifted a hand and tapped once, twice, 3 times on the glass. Then a fourth, the knock, and on the floor beneath the mirror sat a new tape, labeled, Begin Again.
Thank you for watching. If this story gripped you, if the mystery of the tapes, the knock behind the mirror, and the haunting unraveling of identity kept you on the edge of your seat, then you're exactly where you're meant to be. We craft these cinematic, emotionally charged narratives not just to entertain, but to leave you with chills long after the screen fades to black. So if you want more slow-burning horror and stories that explore the shadowy corners of forgotten history and hidden truths, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell. You won't want to miss what comes next.